Welcome to OGR's Digital Dialogue Series. I'm Mark McSweeney, the Interim Executive Director and CEO for OGR, and I'll be your MC for today. OGR has put together a series of education sessions to help you recover from COVID-19 and move forward into a new future. Today's session, How to Harness New Technologies Well, will explore some of the new technologies funeral homes employed during the COVID-19 pandemic and how you can ensure you're using them well at your funeral home. We're excited to have Marty Strohhofer of Matthews Aurora Funeral Solutions with us today to facilitate this conversation. Marty is the Vice President of Marketing and Product Development at Matthews Aurora. He has spoken at state and national organizations on helping funeral homes implement marketing, merchandising, and technology solutions. If during today's session you have any questions for Marty, please use the question box to send questions or comments. He'll be standing by to answer your questions as quickly as he possibly can. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Marty.
Hi, thanks for that introduction, Mark. This is Marty Strohhofer, and I'm really delighted to join you here today and have this session for OGR members. The goal of the presentation today is to talk about how this COVID-19 pandemic has created new opportunities to utilize technology in funeral service. And, you know, it almost doesn't need to be said that the world has changed a bit over these last 6 months. And the pandemic has surely changed everything about our lives, or many things about our lives. And it's certainly changed and had some profound impacts on funeral service, and too many to name, and certain providers have felt different opportunities and struggles through that. But a few of the things that have been kind of the profound changes and shifts in funeral service. The first of those is that through much of the country, there's been some level of prohibition of large gatherings. I was talking to a customer the other day and reading some stories online about families who, on the first day that their loved one passed away, they met with a funeral home and they were going to have a gathering of 100 people, and literally the next day the requirement was set at 50, and then a day later before the funeral, a local requirement was set at only having 10 people. And so we've seen, the impact of some of these local regulations around large gatherings. At the heart of funeral service is gatherings. And so that's quite a fundamental change to how funeral service operators, serve the community. And I think one of the things that we've seen, again, in talking with a lot of customers from around the country, is that we've seen fewer traditional funeral services. Families are deciding that if I can't have, the more traditional services that we wanted or that we were accustomed to having, maybe we can't have a full service public visitation for the whole community, or even we can't have the type of church or liturgical service that we wanted to have, then maybe we just won't have anything at all. Maybe we'll just do a simple cremation and we'll leave it at that. And that again, that has a profound impact on funeral service, not just this year, not just in these first 6 months, but as families kind of reshape their attitudes toward tradition and toward what is expected in funeral service. The third thing that I think is really important is this notion of supporting a community of mourners. This is the heart of funeral service. This is what funeral service operators do for their communities. They support the community when we lose someone in our family or we lose somebody we love. And obviously, given the first two things on this list, it's making it increasingly difficult for funeral professionals to support a community of mourners. Frankly, I have a personal story to share in that one of my very best friends, who I've been friends with since high school, lost his father actually it was on Good Friday in April. And, you know, he would have had a funeral that might have been so crowded it lasted 2 days. My friend's father was kind of an icon in the local community. He was a teacher, a counselor, a coach. And, you know, all of us in this community who you know, loved John and who loved their family kind of were stolen of the opportunity to support their family during that period of time, and to remember John in a public gathering kind of way. And so I've felt it, and I know that in all communities, folks have felt kind of the void of the traditions or of the rituals of coming together to support one another when we lose somebody we love. And you know, the other thing that's happened is that just kind of a general fear rather of in-person meetings. And I think that has also manifested in, you know, a fear of coming together for funeral arrangements, whether it's making arrangements for an at-need death, or certainly making arrangements for pre-need. Again, there's been a number of funeral directors that I've spoken with who've told me that, you know, maybe they haven't had as much trouble getting to meet with families on an at-need basis when a loved one dies, but they really have struggled to get meetings with families who are interested in pre-arranging or doing a pre-need service or contract. So I think all of these things have really hit funeral service over the last 6 months. And one of the things that we've started to rely on throughout society through this pandemic is screens. And, you know, with screens come technology. And if you think about how our reliance on our screens has sort of changed now even more than ever. You know, I've got kids in school who back in March were told not to come to school anymore, and they were doing remote learning from a screen. Almost all of our company meetings now are not in person in our offices, but rather remotely from a screen. So whether it's, you know, laptops, phones, tablets, we've all come to rely on screens more than ever, even if it's just communicating with grandparents and remote family. You know, we're used to using screens now more than ever before. And I found an interesting statistic that 81% of U.S. adults now own a smartphone, and that is up from 35% just in 2011. So what's that? Not 8 years ago. This research was published last year in 2019. In 8 years, we went from a third of the population to now 80% of the population that owns a smartphone. So our screens are ubiquitous, and screens have become a way to get around the challenges that we just talked about the fear of in-person meetings or the prohibitions of large gatherings. And I think then that the technology that we utilize on these screens is something that has certainly impacted funeral service. And that's what we're really here to talk about today. I think that there's been some opportunities that have kind of revealed themselves for using technology in 3 primary areas in funeral service. And that's what we're going to talk about and kind of frame the rest of this presentation around. The first of those is is the selling process. And I know a lot of funeral professionals don't like to consider themselves as salespeople or in selling funerals. But at the end of the day, consumers buy funerals, they buy funeral merchandise, they buy funeral goods. We do sell funerals to families, and the way that we engage with families and we meet with families to introduce the opportunities to create a meaningful end of life event has certainly changed. So we're going to talk about how technology has impacted the selling facet of funeral service. And then we're also going to talk about how technology has impacted the planning. So while selling, I'm going to kind of veer that more toward kind of the pre-need side of funeral service. Planning is certainly, at least in the context that I'm thinking about it today, is really more on kind of the at-need side. When a family experiences a death and the events to celebrate that individual's life start to take shape and are planned. So I think that between selling and planning, there's been a number of opportunities for funeral professionals to utilize technologies that have existed, but also some technologies that are emerging for the planning process of funerals. And then lastly, we'll talk about how technology can be harnessed in the delivery of funeral services. The actual events themselves. How are funeral professionals utilizing technology to enhance service delivery or even provide services to families, given the challenges we talked about earlier around smaller events, fewer traditional funerals, a general fear of gathering, and helping to support families who are mourning the loss of a loved one. So these are the things we're going to talk about today. So let's kind of get into the first of these topics, which is technology-enabled selling. And as I mentioned before, what I'm really kind of focused on here is more on really pre-need selling or even lead generation for funeral homes. And tools that have emerged or that are available in the market today are those that allow families an online and unguided process of making selections or choosing how they want to have a funeral. And that would largely be obviously through a funeral home website. And I think there's a few different sort of opportunities or options when it comes to using technology to enable the selling process. So one is to offer families a digital catalog of both services and merchandise. And so this would be helping families through the selection process of the type of burial service or the type of cremation service that they might want to have for their loved one, and then choosing any type of merchandise that might go along with that service, whether it's a casket or an urn or a burial vault or really any other type of merchandise that they might be interested in. So we'll talk first about digital catalogs. Then from there, maybe one level up in terms of sophistication is offering technology tools that allow families to actually, in an interactive way, to make selections and share those selections with a funeral service provider. So it's one thing to put up a catalog on a website. It's another thing to kind of engage families where they might, create a username and password and go through the selection process and have those choices then presented or sent electronically to a funeral service provider. Kind of the one step beyond the kind of static catalog is having a more interactive catalog where families can make their choices and then send those to the funeral home. And then I think kind of the final step in that opportunity is kind of a full e-commerce, so not just making selections, but ultimately paying for those services or creating a pre-need insurance policy or something to fund that service as well. And so these are kind of the three different kind of tiers of sophistication, you might say, that we've seen emerge and we see funeral homes using to meet this opportunity for technology-enabled selling. So where can you find these types of technologies? Well, for digital catalogs, I know that most of the leading funeral service suppliers offer some sort of digital catalog solution. I know we do at Matthews Aurora Funeral Solutions, and I think a lot of other, of the key industry suppliers offer options for putting catalogs on the funeral home website or making digital catalogs available to share with families. And certainly some funeral website suppliers have a catalog type feature built into the website so that funeral homes could present different merchandise or different service offerings in a catalog type of way. Frankly, too many to name on here to single out, specific suppliers. Most leading suppliers offer this, whether it's through your funeral service partner, casket supplier, a vault supplier, et cetera, or through your website supplier. For the second tier of kind of sophistication, the notion of having interactive selections, certainly many of the leading funeral technology providers offer this capability to where a family can kind of walk through a selection process, make some selections, and have those selections saved and sent to a funeral home. Again, a lot of the leading industry technology providers offer this capability. Some of the leading marketing providers who provide marketing support to funeral service, the funeral service industry, offer these types of solutions. Certainly, we offer a similar solution from Matthews Aurora Funeral Solutions as well. So lots of opportunities to utilize that with families. You'll see a little later, however, that there actually are, based on a survey we did, which I'll reveal a little bit later, there's actually very few funeral service providers utilizing this type of technology. And then finally, again, there's a full sort of e-commerce opportunity where a family could literally go through a website selection process, choose the services, choose the merchandise, basically create a contract and have some type of online payment in the form of paying through credit card or paying through an insurance assignment. This is kind of an emerging field in funeral service. There are certain funeral technology providers that provide this level of sophistication, this kind of full e-commerce. And again, I'm speaking more about paying for a funeral. Obviously, most website providers have, a sympathy store, flower store, or something like that offers families the opportunity to buy flowers and that type of e-commerce. But I'm thinking more of, purchasing a funeral or a pre-need plan and kind of a fully functioning e-commerce opportunity around that. It certainly is emerging with newer technology players in the market, and it's something that I believe will be gaining in popularity, just like everything else in e-commerce has. And if we didn't see enough of a boost in e-commerce over the last 4 or 5 years, certainly when our stores are closed, it has had more people rely on using e-commerce than ever before to research and purchase the goods and services that they need. And so I think we'll see more of this as time goes on. So that's a little bit about how technology has enabled the selling process. Now I want to talk a little bit about the planning process. So kind of moving from a pre-need opportunity to an at-need opportunity, a guided funeral arrangement with families where they'll make their selections, ultimately kind of finalize a funeral contract. There's forms that probably need to be completed. And then there's a whole kind of event scheduling around an at-need funeral that needs to take place. So what types of technology solutions are available to assist the planning process? So one of those options is kind of a new idea around pre-arrangement planning. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. Kind of the next level of sophistication that we've started to see, and I think this has really emerged, excuse me, quite a bit with this pandemic, is the utilization of screen sharing technology to meet with families. The third is really a digital arrangement system. So kind of like planning on a pre-need, but using a using a technology system for kind of walking a family in a guided way with an arranger through the entire arrangement process, from the services, the merchandise, the scheduling of the event, and really kind of everything else needed to plan a funeral or memorial event. And then one of the other technologies that we've seen gain a lot of traction and interest of late has been utilizing electronic signatures. So these are the things we're gonna dive into just a little bit more. So the first of those topics is, again, this idea about pre-arrangement planning. And so again, when I say pre-arrangement, I don't necessarily mean pre-need or somebody planning before there's a death. What I'm talking about here is actually helping families plan when there is a death, but before the arrangement meeting actually starts. I'll dive into this a little more. Today, there are solutions that are provided by leading casket suppliers and certain technology providers. Again, this is kind of a new space and a new idea. 3 providers that I'm aware of who offer a technology solution for this pre-arrangement notion are Passare. There's an app from Batesville called Bridges, and at Matthews Aurora Funeral Solutions, we reintroduced the technology in April called Family Connections that serves that purpose as well. I'd like to dive into this idea a little more because I think it's important, kind of not just now with what we're dealing with the pandemic, but kind of on an ongoing basis, even after some of the restrictions and things kind of fade away in time. So I wanted to kind of help frame this opportunity a bit more around pre-arrangement planning. So when you think about an at-need call and think about kind of the timeline of what happens from the time that the death occurs to the time you get a first call and ultimately, you go remove the body from wherever the place of death was, you have this period of time between the time that the family contacts you and the time that they come in to make the arrangement. And I think, back in the day, it used to be that families would make that call and they'd probably come in the next day and meet with a funeral arranger and go through the arrangement conference. And I think that still happens, but I think today, this period of time between the time of the first call and the time the death occurs and the time of the actual arrangement has become really important. When you think about it, what are families doing during that time? Are they kind of sitting on their hands, waiting to come to the funeral home? I think now more than ever, families are trying to get information. Planning a funeral isn't something that we do every day. Oh, thankfully. I mean, if we're unlucky enough, we do it, 2 or 3 times in a lifetime. So it's not something that families generally know a lot about. And whenever there's something that we don't know a lot about, our tendency is to try to seek out information, to get information prior to having to make a decision. It's a big purchase. Let's be honest. A funeral tends to be a big purchase, not like, buying, lunch or going to the store to get some toilet paper. It's an expensive proposition. And I think during this period of time, families are looking for information. And I think it's critically important because not only in this period of time are families looking for information, they're starting to make up their mind about what they want when they start to see this information before they ever get to the funeral home. So where are families getting information during this period of time? Well, certainly they're getting information from other family members. One of the first things that we do when we lose someone in the family is we call the rest of the family, and maybe we get a hold of great Aunt Edna, and maybe Aunt Edna would be really helpful to the family. But I think sometimes maybe what you hear is, well, don't let the funeral home talk you into this. When Uncle Joe died, we didn't have to do this, we didn't have to do that. And I do think that family certainly influences decisions that people make about end of life services. In an increasing way, I think healthcare and hospice professionals have an opportunity to influence families' decisions. And hospice professionals are terrific at what they do. God bless the people who work in the hospice profession. But, they're not funeral professionals either. And some hospice professionals can be very helpful. Other hospice professionals may not have the degree of knowledge and understanding about all the choices available to families on how to create a meaningful goodbye for not just the immediate family, but for the community. And so we know that hospice has an influence on families' decisions about end of life. And of course, what's the one thing we do when we have big decisions anymore or big purchases we need to make? We go online and we look for information. And so what are families finding online? Well, maybe they're finding, online casket stores when they Google funerals or they Google caskets. And, you read this and it says, you don't need to buy a casket from the funeral home. Don't let the funeral homes talk you into things you don't need. So, these are the type of websites that families might find. but even more trusted websites. For example, on AARP, there's an article on AARP, beware of funeral fraud. And even Time Magazine, I'd call that a trusted publication for most consumers. Your funeral home may be scamming you. So, you never know what families might find when they're left to their own devices to find information online. So back again to this timeline, I guess I'll ask the question, as a funeral provider, how much information do you provide to families between the time you get a first call and the arrangement conference? How much interaction do you offer with families between this period of time? Because I think this is becoming an increasingly important opportunity, and this notion of these technology solutions that offer pre-arrangement planning, the idea is to provide funeral service providers with a way to give families information before they come into the funeral home to actually plan the details of a funeral, and that it comes from the funeral home, a trusted source. So we'll kind of kick back. So, an invitation to the family at a first call might sound something like this. We've created a private, password-protected website just for you and your family to prepare for our arrangement meeting. If you'd like, you could visit and see some of the things we'll talk about during the meeting, review some of the choices that you have, get an idea of what to bring to the arrangement meeting. You'll also see on the website the opportunity to complete some of the biographical information that we'll need to do forms and a death certificate and other paperwork that's required. If you'd like, you don't have to, but if you'd like, you could start to fill out some of that information, and that might make things a little easier during our arrangement meeting. I'll send you a quick link to this site with your private password, and you could even share this with other family members as well. If there's folks who are remote or not able to participate in our arrangement meeting, they'll have an opportunity to see and work with you to see what all of your options are. So this is what it might sound like from a funeral director to a family to provide them this resource about what to expect in an arrangement meeting, or even start to preview some of the choices we have. So I mentioned that Matthews Aurora offers a solution that's kind of in this category called Family Connections. I'll have a very, very just brief commercial about what our program does. So through that website, families can prepare for the arrangement meeting and what to bring, preview and select choices for creating meaningful ceremonies, browse and select caskets and urns and other funeral merchandise, complete the biographical information, and upload pictures that the funeral home might use for an obituary or video tributes. And what that really means to the funeral home is that it provides families a way to prepare for an arrangement conference rather than getting perhaps misinformation about their choices from other sources. It allows the funeral home to learn more about the family and the deceased even before the arrangement meeting, depending on how much the family completes of the biographical information. And of course, it'll help families involve remote participants in the arrangement and planning process. So that's one. I mentioned a couple of other solutions that are in the market that really deal with this notion of pre-arrangement planning around an at-need case. So getting back to kind of our hierarchy of sophistication around technology tools for planning, the next one would be by using screen sharing technology, similar to the program we're using for these webinars today. I think we're using GoToMeeting, but you've probably maybe seen or heard of these other software packages, WebEx and Zoom. All of them basically offer different features and functions, but essentially allow someone to share their screen with somebody's screen on the other end, whether they're looking from a phone or looking from a tablet or a computer. I get to share my computer screen with you. You guys have all used this because you're using it now for this webinar, but I don't think there's a lot of funeral homes who are using this type of technology in the planning process, and especially with the fear that some families have about coming in to make arrangements, or the need to work with families kind of who might be remote or have remote participants. This screen sharing is really a great way to do it. This isn't new technology, been around a long time, but I think has taken on even greater importance given the restrictions that we've seen in this pandemic. The third kind of level is having kind of a complete digital arrangement system. So I could share my screen and a family could see my face, but the idea of an arrangement system is a technology-based system that the family kind of steps through with an arranger in a guided way that kind of goes through all the choices that families have for services, the choices that family have for merchandise. In some cases, maybe it's even planning, the dates and times and locations of where the funeral events might be. So leading casket suppliers offer these digital arrangement systems. Some of the leading funeral technology providers also offer these digital arrangement systems. It's kind of broadly available now. Of course, Matthews Aurora offers a system like that as well. So there's plenty of choices when it comes to finding a digital arrangement system to help work with families during this time. And then the last technology that I wanted to touch on was electronic signatures. And there are certain funeral technology providers that are offering or integrating electronic signatures into their offering. And I use electronic signatures and digital signatures. We could get a little bit geeky here about kind of the distinction between e-signatures and digital signatures, but I'll spare you that that differentiation. There are some services out there as well that funeral homes can use. So either you could use a solution that's embedded in a funeral technology offering that you might use, or independent of that, you could certainly use any of these type of kind of commercially available digital signature technologies. DocuSign is kind of the most proliferant of those in the market. DocuSign, Adobe offers a solution, SignEasy. There's a few others. Those three are probably the most popular. And what that allows for is you to kind of package up forms. Maybe they are authorization forms or a contract, any of the forms that a family might need to sign at the time of planning a funeral, and email them to a family or send them electronically to a family. The family opens it, they see where they have to sign, and in most cases they can do that through a digital type of entry in a file, and then save it and send that back to the funeral home. So electronic signatures, when families have this fear of coming in and meeting in person, is something that has also started to take root much more in funeral service. So that covers kind of the tech-enabled planning. So we've talked about selling, we've talked about planning, Now, the last of the opportunities that I wanted to cover today is this notion of using technology to enable service delivery. And what I really mean by that is helping mourners who cannot attend a funeral, whether they can't attend because they're at a distance, whether they can't attend because they're quarantined, in a nursing home, whether they can't attend because of a local prohibition on large events. It's finding a way to utilize technology to help mourners participate in the services that you do hold. And there's two primary technologies and options that I wanted to talk about here. The first is live streaming of services. And this provides, again, this live streaming funeral services honestly isn't new. These services have been around for more than a decade. And obviously involves setting up a camera in the funeral home and allowing kind of a live recording of the event that gets sent out over the internet. And really that provides for remote viewing of a funeral service, obviously. The second option that I wanted to kind of share a little more of is really kind of a newer thing that I'm starting to see, and that is really having web-based interactive services. And I'll talk a little more about that in a second. So again, your options for live streaming services. Some of the leading funeral website suppliers offer live streaming options. I know Funeral One does. I know Frazier does. I believe that there are others who offer options for including a live stream option with their website platform. I know there are audiovisual providers who will actually do the work of setting up AV systems in the funeral home, whether it's sound systems or video systems, and they also usually offer a streaming service as part of their offerings as well. And then lastly, there's the more commercial opportunities to do live streaming through whether it's like a Facebook Live or YouTube or Zoom. So again, some of the providers that I know offer live streaming of funerals, these are funeral companies. These are some of the providers that I found that I'm aware of that offer this type of service. So plenty of choices for that as well. I will make a comment about Facebook Live and YouTube. One of the things I think that funeral professionals have found that have tried to use Facebook Live or YouTube to live stream events has been an issue with music licensing. So the issue is that Facebook and YouTube both have their own licensing with the music recording companies. And so if there is a recording that is protected, oftentimes Facebook and YouTube will either mute that music. Believe it or not, they can have a technology where they can actually identify if it's a song that is protected, and they can mute the sound on the event or even stop the recording. If you use one of these other providers and you're actually streaming it through your own website, then the funeral home, I believe, has to have an additional licensing to live stream that or even provide a recording of it online. So be wary of the licensing involved in music performance around this technology. You can contact your state associations, or I'm sure OGR has resources available to help funeral homes who are interested or want to learn more about those licensing requirements that you have. And then the last technology that, again, is kind of a newer thing that I wanted to touch on is this notion of web-based interactive services. And there's a couple of providers or ways that you could do that. You could, again, do that through kind of the basic screen sharing applications that are out there, the Zoom, the WebEx, the GoToMeeting. And I've also seen now the emergence of concierge services that will work with funeral homes or even work directly with families to set up and monitor and kind of facilitate a web-based gathering like a Zoom meeting. This is what it might look like. This is a Zoom interface. Any of you who've done Zoom calls with loved ones or colleagues or meetings maybe have seen an interface that looks like this, or you've seen the commercials on TV. So imagine doing an entire service this way in lieu of an in-person service, or perhaps in addition to an in-person service, of having a service like this. And maybe the order of the event would be somewhat similar to a funeral ceremony that you would have in a chapel. There'd be, a welcome, perhaps a video tribute or a slideshow that would be shown on the screen that everyone could view. Maybe someone is designated to do some type of reading. There would be a eulogy by one or more people. The other opportunity that you could do through this technology is memory sharing. Kind of pass the mic kind of thing online, and allow a small community of loved ones to share their stories, or to offer a remembrance of their loved one, and maybe even a musical selection or a performance. Someone might sing a song or play the piano or the flute or something, and offer a really nice performance as part of that as well. I think it's really interesting to see this emerge, and I wonder if we might start to see more of this as more of us have become kind of used to these screen sharing opportunities, Zoom or other services like that. So we've got to the end, and I wanted to also share some information with you. I was curious. I do talk to a lot of funeral professionals kind of day in and day out, but I was curious as to which of some of these technologies funeral homes are actually using. So at Matthews Aurora, we put together a quick survey just last week. The 4th of July week before we recorded this meeting isn't always the best week to reach a lot of people, but we had more than 100 respondents to the survey, and I wanted to share these survey results quickly with you. So the first question was, in the past 6 months, have you had to make more online or virtual arrangements with families? And you'll see the result about 50-50. About half the respondents indicated that they have made more online or virtual arrangements with families. Frankly, I'm a little surprised that it's only 50%. The next question was, which of the following technologies have you employed over the past 6 months? Check all that apply. So here was the results. So the remote screen sharing. So again, that's using a service like Zoom or WebEx or GoToMeeting. Only 28% of the about 107, 108 respondents indicated that they've used a remote screen sharing tool. About 20% indicated they've used an online arrangement software. About 50% indicated that they've used digital merchandise catalogs on their website, maybe a digital casket catalog or urn catalog or vault catalog. About 43% indicate that they've used funeral webcasting over the past 6 months. 28% indicated they've utilized digital signatures, and 18% have indicated that they've done online funeral payments. So I found that a little bit interesting, just to see what your colleagues are using. And again, 107 or 8 funeral directors is not a huge data point, but I think it offers a little bit of direction in terms of what technologies are being used. We asked what percentage of families served over the last 6 months utilized funeral webcasting services, and you'll see about 40% said none of the families they've served have used webcasting, and about 42% indicated that it was between 1 and 25% of the services that they held utilized webcasting. So that would indicate that less than 20% of the respondents used webcast with families, more than a quarter of the time, as you see the result. And the last question we asked was, do you charge families for the use of funeral webcasting services? And as you can see, overwhelmingly, most funeral homes do not charge extra. I mean, perhaps the cost might be baked into a basic service charge, but as an itemized item that families have to select, very few funeral homes actually have that as an extra item that families must pay for above and beyond. So, we're just to summarize those observations of the survey. It seems to me that many funeral homes have been asked to offer remote arrangements, but so far there's been pretty limited adoption of online technology to make those types of arrangements, and that live streaming is, even if it's included and offered, it's just not used very much. I would say those are again, it was kind of a quick and easy survey, but I felt like the results were a little bit interesting, and hopefully it gives you kind of a point of reference to what some of your colleagues are doing around the country. So we're at the time to wrap this up. We talked about opportunities to leverage technology to serve families in kind of 3 capacities: technologies that aid in the selling process, primarily around pre-need; technologies that aid in helping families plan at-need events; and technologies that aid in the delivery of services themselves. At the end of the day, there's a lot of options out there, and there's different degrees of sophistication. I suggest that as you look at all of the options available, that you choose what your firm and your families might be comfortable with. But a warning on that is, I hear it a lot from funeral directors that say, well, I don't think families would use this. And I'll just caution to say that while some of these opportunities might not be for all families, they certainly may be for some. And, it's getting to the point where some families might even expect that funeral homes and funeral service providers bring a level of sophistication or a level of customer service that they see in so many other areas of their life. So hopefully I've presented some ideas that you can utilize. You see a little bit about what others in the industry are doing. And again, to wrap up, I appreciate the opportunity to participate with OGR in providing this session for you. I think we will open it up for questions as well. So thank you all very much for being here and listening.
Marty, thank you so much. We do have just a few minutes for a couple of questions that have come in. So, Marty, if you're ready for this, here is one of the questions. Have you found a general age range that embraces using online catalog options?
So the information we've got from a lot of our customers who utilize digital solutions like this is that there really is no specific age range across the board. I mean, clearly, folks who are elderly, late 80s, may not have computers and may not have access to those types of things. But I would say, nearly everybody else, we've seen widespread adoption of using these tools. And, it's as long as someone has a computer, we find that they're comfortable using these different technologies to find information. I know and hear and even see on social media lots of grandparents and even great-grandparents who are online using these types of tools and technologies. So our experience with our customers is that as long as someone's got a computer or a smartphone, they're comfortable using it.
Great, thank you. As we reach the top of the hour, I've got time for one more question for you. And this came in and said, while there are funeral homes making most of their arrangements online and not meeting with the family, is there some trepidation that this minimizes the need for a funeral director?
I think ideally, a funeral director adds a lot of, adds a lot of value to the arrangement. A computer screen can't ask the family every question about how they might create a really meaningful event. Ideally, the best is to have a funeral arranger in a meeting. But as we talked about using some of those technologies, it may not have to be face-to-face in a traditional funeral home. It could be in an interview like we're doing right now. So I would say the funeral professional is an extremely valuable part of the arrangement process. But I'd also say, especially we see more around pre-planning, that sometimes folks are a little uncomfortable meeting with and I hate to use this term, a funeral salesperson, which I know funeral professionals are not, but I do think that there are a certain segment who want the comfort and the ability to shop by themselves. It's not much different than if you're shopping for a home or shopping for a car. A lot of people like to do a little bit of research independently before they're ready to make a buying decision. But certainly at-need funerals, it should never take the place of the funeral professional. I hope funeral professionals utilize these technologies to make it a part of what they do with families, not separate the funeral professional from the family.
Well, Marty Strawhofer of Matthews Aurora Funeral Solutions, thanks so much for your expertise and your insights today. Truly appreciate it. For the rest of you joining us, if you've attended today's session and registered to receive CE credits, you'll be receiving your certificate of attendance in the next few weeks. So please direct any questions you may have about that to Alyssa Castile in the OGR office. Following this session, you will be receiving a follow-up email from OGR. If you'd also take a few minutes just to complete a short survey at today's session, it'll help us better serve you in the months to come and further plan out more of these Digital Dialogue Series events. You will receive that link as well as Alyssa's contact information in that follow-up email that I referenced.